dashboard to the cloud. Okay, so now I activated it.
Cool.
So
Should be good.
is it a manual step on every meeting?
I believe so. I know when you claim the host, it like kicks the recording off, but I've been relying on that. But people are saying that our recordings aren't making it to the cloud, so I think we do need to do this manual step. I think.
Oh, okay. Okay, so hi everyone. This is my first time being the host of this meeting. So forgive me if I forget something. Please feel free to correct me. So I'll start. This is today it's June 26th, and we are starting the meeting of Gateway Inference Extension. This is a CNCF project, so please be kind one another and respectful. Let me just open the agenda, what we have today, and share my screen. Okay. Okay. So I see we have a few items here. So let's start by reviewing what we have from last week, the action items. Kellen, perf benchmark dashboard.
Yeah, I need to move forward on that still. I'll reach out to Kaushik if he's on the call. No, I'll reach out to Kaushik and see if we can get that dashboard exposed publicly.
Okay, do we want to move this action item?
Yeah, go ahead and move it up. Keep me accountable.
Yeah.
I have a couple weeks because we don't have a meeting next week.
Okay. Okay, for the other items, Denian, I see everything was handled. Do you want to update on any of these?
No, we cut the release, which I have put in the agenda. What was the other one here? Cut the release and yeah, no. So those AIs are complete, and yeah, I just wanted to do a quick PSA, make sure that everyone knew that we cut the 4.0 release. We also have a 0.5 milestone set. So that should give some insight into priorities for the next release. So please take a look at both, and yeah, let us know if you have any questions.
Perfect. So back to the agenda of today.
One
So I
question
see
on the 0.5 release. Do we have a target date? Did we agree on that?
Yeah, it should be in the milestone. So you want to just click on the milestone. So
yeah.
I think I mentioned this before that I've used milestones for other projects and find them really useful. Where it gives us a target, right? We could put the target date in there, which what is it? I forget what I said. July 10th.
Okay.
Yeah, July 10th, and then as issues or PRs come up that we say, hey, we want to target this milestone within the particular issue. Nir, if you could do me a favor and just click on one of those items, so everyone kind of sees, right? So when we create an issue or a PR, and we say, gosh, we really want this in a particular milestone, we just click that the mechanical icon, select the milestone, and boom. And then if we, as we get closer to the milestone, we say, oh, geez, this isn't going to make it. We work through those issues and figure out, okay, do we push the milestone out? Let's retarget the date on the milestone, or do we just push this to the next milestone, create a new milestone, set the new date, and then we can just flip this bit here on the milestone settings. And again, it's just found it really useful.
Yeah. Okay. So let's. I think we can review the target features offline, or do you want to go through them now?
Yeah, and so what I did is I basically, this was I think a couple weeks ago with Song's help. We went through a lot of these features that we were intending for '04, and then we got to a point where we said, we either push the '04 milestone further out, or we just start pushing some of the features, and we made that decision to say, okay, let's take some of these. And so when I created the '05 milestone, just moved all these '04s that we said are not going to make it, put them in the '05. And so a lot of these are just kind of placeholders. What we discussed as part of this grooming was '05 was going to have a relatively short time frame, right? So we just cut '04 and '05 is July 10th. And in reality, July 10th feels more like a couple of days from now with some of the U.S. holidays that will be occurring. And we did that because for '05, the number one priority is completing the conformance test suite. And I think that's the second to the last item there, if you feel like clicking on that there. And the reason why we did this is that we felt like we need to have a stable release for implementations, such as K-Gateway, Istio, and others, right? To be able to have a stable conformance suite that the implementations can start testing against. So long story short, I feel like a lot of these issues will most likely not make it in the '05 milestone. What we could do in the future, and what I've done with some other projects, is just have a backlog milestone that we just say, okay, throw these in the backlog. But I think that's something we could take offline and brainstorm if we want to take that approach.
So if you want to limit this to mostly try to get the conformance tests in place to help providers with releases, I think that's reasonable. I feel that if we can limit it to that, that's good. But then we need to think about, okay, what's beyond that? What are the actual features that we want to push for 0.6 then, which includes the configuration, APIs, and the whole pluggability framework being in place. The data layer extensions, the queuing, those heavy features, we should try to again plan for them. At least
Yeah,
that makes
absolutely.
Yeah. Right.
I agree on this.
Absolutely.
I think most of the items in the list here are not going to make it by July 10th. Especially considering the vacation days that we have next week. And without any connection, even if there weren't any vacation days, I think most of these items were just pushed from 0.4, but they are not necessarily the highest priority ones.
Then
So
We should
I'm
take
not sure
this
even
offline
that.
if that's the case. If that belief is the case, I don't know if we need to spend the whole hour doing this, but there are definitely some key things we want in there.
So my main goal for this release is, I don't want to jump the line too much, but that issue for conformance tests, I think we're largely complete now. And I would love to give implementations a stable target to submit conformance reports against, and that means a released artifact of some kind. There's probably other things we could include in the release, but I do want to get that in the first half of July if we can.
So if that's the case, if this is almost closed, to completion, I would actually recommend to release already, like in the next week or so. If what we have right now is almost complete, and let's try to plan for like a release that targets more concrete features, just to get like the providers unblocked. We don't really need to push for another week and a half if it's already in place.
I don't know, I'll defer to Danian. Basically, what I hate to release conformance tests that we don't already have some basics. It's kind of a weird sequence where you want to have some signal from a few different implementations that the conformance tests we have work reasonably well. The gaps that may exist for any given implementation are expected. There, there's no problems in our conformance tests. And then once we're confident that our conformance tests are correct, then trigger a release. So even though our conformance tests are what I would call complete right now, and we've run them against a couple implementations, I'd love to get just a little bit more signal before we trigger a release. But I mean, that could still mean, I would say next week, but next week is going to be holidays for a lot of people. So I don't know.
Okay, my goal is like if we release early and then we can plan for 0.6, maybe even end of July for 0.6. But yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great to have like this pretty frequent release cycle. Might as well keep it flowing. I agree with the general sentiment of when we're ready for release, we should just release.
So, with the conformance test, it's probably going to be until probably maybe next week I could start from the K-Gateway side. I've got no issue with if we at least, Rob, have a reasonable level of confidence, if it's with GKE or another implementation that we've run these conformance tests against.
Yeah, I know folks have been running them against Istio and against GKE so far. Maybe I can find someone who can, if you can share instructions, we could run them against K-Gateway just to see like what kind of gaps there are and if any are unexpected. Can follow up async on that.
Okay. So with that said, I can take an AI to create the 0.6 milestone, unless someone else wants to go through the process. I mean, it's super easy, but we create the 0.6 milestone, and then beyond the conformance test, there is a bug there that needs to be addressed. And that's just part of our release process that has the release script has a bug. And then I know Art has made some progress with the docs versioning. We have a bit of a blocker with just trying to navigate how Netlify and potentially having to create a proud job. So that may land as well. But if we want to just push everything off to 0.6 and just have 0.5 be conformance, I don't have an issue with that.
I think let's wait to get a signal. And as far as the Netlify, I think Rob is your go-to. I know you and Rob have a pretty decent relationship.
Yeah, I wish I was more helpful. I feel like I've set these things up before, but I've never done versioned config in Netlify. And when I've looked into it in the past, it just has seemed painful. And unfortunately, like at least the way they've set it up for Gateway API, and I think for Inference Extension 2, we have like no admin access to Netlify. We can control the config on our side, but we can't actually get into their UI and like make any changes directly with them just through CI. So I don't know. I am sadly pretty useless beyond the basics I know. And this has exceeded my basic understanding, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I need to circle around to see what Art has done. It's just I've had a lot on my plate with higher priority tasks here in the last week. That's why I've kind of been silent across the board since cutting the release. So let me circle back with him. But yeah, I mean, either way, we need to create the 0.6 milestone. Do we just take a stab at the timing of it? I mean, I don't know. I mean, when do we want to say 0.6?
I would prefer end of July ish, something like that.
As a reminder, I also have this wish list item to get Inference Pool to GA sometime in August, so that would be another release.
I thought that was the plan of record.
Yeah.
Didn't we already do the Signet review?
Yeah, we have.
Okay. And we got sign off there, or?
I mean, we
pre-review,
should.
right?
Yeah, it was like a pre-review of here's where we're going. Tell us if we're off base, but I don't think it's formal final sign off yet. Just there were no big glaring issues that people saw.
And Rob, I forget some of the details. So do we have to have like a release? Is it a certain, I guess what I'm trying to get at is like, is there a certain period of time that we want to release before having the GA release? I guess I just go back and look at
I mean,
that slide.
Gateway API, our releases have been a whole lot slower, and I would hate to bring that on this group because this project has been releasing pretty rapidly, which is awesome. In Gateway API, we've historically had like a 2-week period between our initial release candidate and our final release to give implementations time to validate and confirm that the latest release works well with their controllers. I think we've got a tighter feedback loop here, especially if we start getting conformance reports in sometime early July. Then I'll feel pretty confident about a shorter window between that and 1.0 or Inference Pool GA, whatever that release version is.
I'd like to, if that's fine with all, to stop at this point to make sure we have enough time to cover all the topics in the list, because we do have some time that we need to spend on the conformance test updates, and then Abdullah has this item about revisiting the inference model API, which I think would take some time.
Hey, Nair, I just want to make one last quick point is that if we are going to change that date, just remember that we need to cut a release candidate before the release. So if we're going to move that any earlier, we literally need to, I think, probably cut the RC either tomorrow or beginning of next week. So just keep that in mind. And we probably also need to select who's going to be the release manager.
Yeah, if you ask me, I would keep the original date that you put, Daniel, especially because of the vacation days. So I had doing a release and then, go out on vacation. If there is some issue, it's like putting things on production before the weekend. There is some issue and then we disappear. So I had doing such things. I would prefer waiting like another week, and then do it to be more responsive if anything happens.
So that's fine. And Abdullah, if you want to like discuss this more, let's just take it offline. But either way, we still need to select a release manager, and again, that release manager would be responsible for cutting the RC, testing the stuff, and, all that good stuff. And again, there is a bug in that release process that we need to resolve. So
Yeah, Danny, and I'll reach out to you if we make any changes. Cool.
Okay. So let's move on to the next item. Rob, conformance tests.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, okay. So yeah, the first thing we already basically covered, which is yay, conformance tests are largely complete. Thanks to Bob and Sina for doing a lot of work to get those across the line. I know Bob in some of his most recent PRs has been like posting results, from running it against a couple implementations to at least validate that we're in the right track. But then there's a sub item here, which is actually an API clarification, I think, that's driven by conformance tests. One of the good things about conformance tests is you kind of start to find gaps in API spec. And we hadn't actually specified that when an inference pool points to an extension that doesn't exist, what it should do. This is pretty tiny, but it's just suggesting that whenever this happens, you need to set the resolved refs condition on inference pool to false. This is pretty consistent with what we're doing elsewhere in Gateway API. It's the same condition name, same whatever. So hopefully that's fine. I know that this particular change is breaking on every implementation we've tested against. So it will probably require some corresponding controller work. But I hope it's pretty tiny in the grand scheme of things.
So, Rob, a question about this. So just making sure it's not considered as an API change, right?
It's like, I wouldn't call it an API change, but it is a clarification of sorts, because we hadn't really said what you do when, you could connect the dots because there was already a resolved refs condition defined, but we didn't have anywhere in the spec that said, when this extension reference points to something that doesn't exist, you should set this condition. And this is saying you should do that.
Yeah. I'm asking because of the conditions for GA. The one of the conditions is to have the API stable for 6 months or so. Okay.
Oh yeah. No, this is at least taking gateway API standards into account. Like this is very much the kind of thing that we've done before of clear. I think that the specific wording is no major or no significant changes to an API surface. And this feels like we're not changing any fields. We're not changing it. We're just saying, hey, when this happens, you should really set this value.
Yeah. I understand. Just putting some expectations on what should be the value.
Yep.
Okay. Any other updates about the conformance, or should we move to the next item?
No, that's all. I mean, if you're, if you're working on an implementation and aren't on our radar, haven't had a chance to run conformance tests, whatever, would love to chat about how we can, the goal for these conformance tests is not to be surprising to anyone. It's just to make sure that we're all doing the same thing. That's all. So we can have this kind of consistent experience where anyone who's writing an extension has a guarantee that it's going to work with any, gateway controller. They don't have to test with everyone individually, and vice versa. So, yeah.
Yeah. And do we have I know we need 3 implementations that are passing the conformance tests. We have GKE, right, and Istio. And the third candidate is K-Gateway. Do we have more candidates, or is it just K-Gateway?
There are 3 others on my radar. There is Envoy's AI Gateway, which is working on support for this, already has some initial support.
Yeah.
There is Agent Gateway from Solo, and then there is Alibaba's cloud Kubernetes service. I forget what it is, but they're one of the implementations that claim support for this API. I've chatted with them a bit about what it would take to get them to a conformant state. They seem interested, but I don't know what their timeline is.
And Rob, Alibaba, is that based on Envoy Gateway?
I'm not sure what they're based on. You might know better than I do, actually.
Yeah, I thought they were, but not.
Yeah, I do remember that one of their team members in Alibaba, they pushed a PR to claim they are using inference extension, and we have it in our documentation somewhere, in one of the readmes. But I have no idea what they are doing. Yeah.
Yeah, same. I mean, they have public docs that show how it's supposed to work. I don't have an account, so I haven't tested it out to validate, but it's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just popped it in the chat window. I'll double check here, but just for others to take a look at as well. And yeah, quickly confirm gateway with inference extension components built based on
Yeah.
project.
Yeah. And I do remember also they have some diagram that looks exactly like we have somewhere here.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, sounds good. So last item, Abdullah, do you wanna take it?
You can present. Just click on the link. I just wanted to bring to your attention like a second option in that proposal with regards to how we want to express policies. In the original proposal, we discussed having a inference scheduling objective API, like a single API that replaces inference model to capture scheduling objectives. In this second option, we're exploring another approach where we have a separate API for each policy. Please take a look. This is based on several, discussions we had over the comments and with the larger community, mostly around how we support like MAS, like model as a service, how the policies would compose, how they scale and whatnot. Just FYI, this is a new option that's been added to the document, to this public document. Please take a look and give your feedback.
Rob?
Yeah, one of the ideas I've chatted a little with Abdullah about this as well as I am curious what we, if we have kind of a North Star for where this eventually goes. It feels like if you look at other systems, or if you look at where you would love to end up at some point in the future, it seems like, at least from my naive, limited, experience in this space, you'd want to be able to say this combination of, I don't know, an identity and maybe a target model should have this priority, criticality, whatever, like based on basically whoever is making the request, whatever the client is, they should have this kind of criticality. What we have right now in this proposal is basically like the client selects, basically criticality in this, or whatever that, or maybe am I misunderstanding, Abdullah?
I mean, it's not the client. I mean, it's at the end of the day, you need to have a match. You need to match the request with that policy, right? Where do you put that?
Oh, right. Yeah, no,
Is
yeah, I forgot you had the example a bit further down where you basically have instead of, like, when I initially interpreted this, I thought that it was user sets a client sets a header,
yeah.
and that's the criticality they get. Your example further, I mean, that is one potential way to use this, but the
Right.
example you have further down is basically HV route matches based
Exactly.
on
Yeah.
some arbitrary criteria, TBD, and then you have request header modifier that basically just go up a little bit. Sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
that one.
Exactly.
So arbitrary matches depending on use case, and then you say for requests coming in through this flow, you set these headers, right? So basically, what
And
that becomes is a contract between the gateway and the extension, EPP, whatever, that
right.
the that is what's defining criticality, right? And so
the goal here again is for APP or the extension itself and the APIs around it. They don't really need to define a concrete way for you to say, okay, here is what is an entity that you want to track, right? Like in terms of criticality and so forth. We have some level of indirection here, basically using this concept of a match, right? And there's some higher level layer that would do that. Like I think Itai mentioned that in their system in IBM, they have another layer that does auth, does header scraping, and then it applies, okay, what this request should get, right? It should be assigned to this SLO, or this request belongs to this use case, and so I need to apply this SLO to it. And it's coming from this user, and so I should assign it this criticality. And the idea here is that we can't express all of that in headers, right? Like you need to define the details of these policies in an object, in an API, but you need to establish the connection, and the headers are actually just the connection between them. So, but again, like there's option 2, but there's a 2.1 where we're proposing that there is actually a concrete API to define the match. I think if Jenny suggested the name called the request class, I'm starting to get like cozying up to this idea as well.
Doesn't the request class having a match, doesn't that open up that can of worms where we're redoing HTTP route again though?
Yes.
Yeah.
But
The
again,
thing that I'd be really nervous about is, not just copying the API, but also basically, I think the way that this would be implemented would require extensions to basically implement a data plane, right? So, whatever the basic matching criteria we have here, maybe it starts as just headers. I don't know. You still need to implement that in Go or whatever language your extension is written in, which could, increase the barrier to entry for any new extension. We can cover that with, I don't know what. It's also a slippery slope, right? Because there's a lot of matches in HTTP route. If you want to start covering all of those, again, that's just more for each extension to be thinking about.
Yeah, the HTTP route is still like an option here. My concern is that we overload it if we want to rely too much on that, might not be what it's being designed for. And the match here is different though from, I see it from HTTPR is trying to route. Here I'm trying to define the policies. So they are not, like conceptually, they're doing two different things. It's just, yeah. Kellen, you had your hands up. Oh, I'm not sure about the order.
Sorry, yeah, I'll drop it.
Daniel, Shmuel, I don't know who was first.
Shmuel, go ahead.
All right, I'll go. So one minor thing, Abdullah, you
Mhm.
turn off, I think in your document, you have the pagination turned on. You turn that off. Settings someplace or other, then it flows better. It won't break the code will be more straightened. That's very minor. That's a
I plus one. I love the pageless mode or whatever.
Yeah,
Well,
the
it's
pageless is
default.
superior.
It's default in Google's internal documents, not on the public ones.
That's like I said, it's a nit. That's not the issue. I think one of the issues we're struggling with here is that this GIE, and I think on purpose, has no notion of a user, right? Requests come, and the assumption is that they're trusted. Okay, there's no checking that the user has access to the model in question, to the lore in question, whatever it be. And that also depends on whether you're running model as a service kind of thing, or you're running a cluster of stuff that your internal applications, your applications are using, and therefore the applications do all the checking, and now they just still do their thing. And when you set everything up, DevOps just put it together and said, okay, this application is critical. You put this header in there, and off we go. And you trust them. These are people. These are things you trust. Versus a true model as a service thing, like Watson XAI is, IBM has, where it's your requests are coming from the wild, the untrusted wild out there. And as was mentioned, Itai said, and it is true. IBM has a front end pod that deals with security and other things and checking and all sorts of things to do that. And presumably that's the model here, I would presume. If anyone was trying to use the GIE in a model as a service situation, that's what they would be doing. So that's probably okay. We just need a way to communicate things across.
Yeah.
And maybe we don't need a full matching. Maybe we don't need to go that far. That's going too far to do full matching, you know.
Exactly.
Like you know, HTTP route could do, you know, paths and partial
Exactly.
paths and also
Yeah.
wild things and patterns. And I imagine, I've never seen it, I imagine you can even do patterns on headers, which is pretty wild, to be honest.
We don't need it.
But I don't think we need to go there.
Yeah, exactly right. Like I think it should be scoped down by the match if we were to have one there. The other thing is, we previously defined the scope of Inference Gateway as a component that tries to schedule requests on managed or deployed model servers. Authentication authorization is a concern of another component that sits in front of it. So to me, this composes like Rob.
Yeah, no, the more I hear, the more I think we're all saying variations of the same thing here, or we're coming to some kind of consensus. Is Carl, I think your point of basically, which is similar to what Abdullah had said too, of the composition here, right? That you don't really want endpoint picker or these extensions to be aware of or need to be aware of identities, right? You want that to be taken care of for it at a higher level. And by the time it gets to endpoint picker, it should really just care about like what criticality or what, fairness, like some more abstract things than an identity. And so even if right now we don't have a great way to map, or, we don't have a standard way to map an identity to criticality, I think the right layer for that to happen is before it gets to endpoint picker. And we can we have a few ways to make that work now with the like request header modifier or trusted clients that just set whatever, whatever it is. But it seems like as we go further, we could have a more standard way of like mapping an input to that kind of well-defined output that endpoint picker would understand, right? So it didn't require, like Abdullah already has this approach where customers don't, or clients don't need to set the headers directly. They set a request and we translate that specific request, the characteristics of that request to a specific set of headers. That seems like a good first step. And then maybe in the future, we can take that a bit further with, some identity mapping or something. I don't know what that looks like yet, but where it becomes a little bit more natural or easy to express.
So,
but if it, I guess maybe to summarize, I was kind of rambling there, but I would say, I think the layering is correct of the idea of this should be in the gateways domain, and we want to limit the complexity on extension side. Extension should just be taking instructions basically, and those instructions shouldn't care about an identity, for example, is my opinion.
yeah, so I think everyone said the same in different words. So I think we all agree that identity management, authorization, authentication, should be handled in the layer before EPP. Daniel?
Yeah, I put in the chat window reference to Gateway API policy attachment to GEP 713. And I apologize not being able to really spend much time at all on this design doc, but whenever it does come across my radar, this is kind of the one thing that is top of mind to me. It just seems like this should be like an inference scheduling or scheduling objective policy. So I just want to kind of understand or throw that out there for consideration. And, as part of policy, and I'm glad Rob's here because he knows this far better than I do, but like, as we looked at this option, I think it's called option 2, Abdullah, and you see like the pull ref, and I think if it was like a policy attachment, that would just be like a standard target, right? So I could go ahead and say, instead of just applying this policy to a single pool, I want to apply this to, let's say, an HTTP route that targets multiple pools, or a gateway that targets even more pools, right? And so just something to throw out there to consider.
So you brought this up every time we've talked about inference model. There are policy-like features to it. That's agreed, and I think that's what Abdullah is trying to cut out. But there are non-policy-like features to it as well that I think if we just treat this as a policy, we do ourselves a disservice. So as mentioned, Abdullah did cut out the scheduling objective to make it a policy, things that are policy-like, but policy is entirely subject or objective. It has no sense of state. Anything like you mentioned can be applied to it. That's not the case for the inference model. And so if we're to decompose this, parts of it cannot just all be a policy. I think we've done this loop enough times, but I think there are policy-like features. That's what this API is trying to do. But there's also non-policy-like features that we need to take into account.
Sorry, what are the non-policy feature? I haven't followed this as closely as I should.
Sure. So fairness needs some level of identification to bucketize requests coming in. You can't really say that one resource is gobbling up more than another unless you track it. So what do we track it on is the question. Because this is intended to be a multi-tenant pool. If it's a multi-tenant pool, then by definition, one resource may use more than another. And so Inference Gateway is working as the regulator to make sure that one resource gets its fair allocation compared to the others. So that can't just be a policy because, again, we need to track on something.
I'm not sure that means it can't be a policy. Like, rate limiting has the same problem.
Rate limiting has some sense of identification, though, right? Like you're identifying the client by their IP. So that's the key that's used. So that identity is built in.
I get it, because what I forgot what's changing here is that we've removed model name as a match from. Is that it? Or?
Right. That was originally used as the identifier. I'm fine if that's not the identifier. I agree with not telling a user how they need to identify in their system. If we want to expose that in some way, that's fine, but it doesn't remove the need.
I don't have enough context here, but I'm just trying to think through thought experiment for a second, right? Like, let's imagine that we have two policies at play. One policy is attached to the pool directly, and it's for model A. And we have another policy that's attached to the gateway, and it's for model B. That seems like, if the extension could somehow make sense of that. I mean, this is adding significant work. I guess that's one thing that is very clear to me as I'm talking out loud. It's adding significant complexity to the extension, in the sense that it needs to understand the entire tree, kind of like move up the chain, deal with conflicts, like where, like, does the value at the gateway override, if you have config at gateway and pool, like what has precedence. It does add significant complexity. So, like, as I'm talking about it more, I am seeing why maybe it would add more complexity than it's worth. I'm I'm not sure.
Which part adds complexity? Sorry.
So basically, anytime you have a policy that can attach at multiple levels, so imagine it can attach at a pool, at a route, and at a gateway, then the thing that ultimately needs to determine what policies apply to it are EPP. So what you end up with is this awful scenario where EPP then needs to, like, if it attaches to route, that's probably one of the worst.
Yeah.
EPP then needs to understand all of the matches in the route and determine if the request coming in matches that request. Yeah. Okay.
You're referring to what Daniel was suggesting then, right? Like,
yeah.
I think it's really hard to think about it this way. Like, it's not like, for example, criticality doesn't apply to a pool. It applies to a flow or apply to a specific set of requests versus others. We will have a default criticality, of course, that will assign to requests that don't match any of the defined criticalities, for example, or an SLO, right? Like, we will have a default one. So that's what it would fall back into. With regards to,
but that doesn't solve the identity problem. To Mike's point, do we just want to use an IP? I don't think that's very useful, right?
IP is nice for long.
Yeah, so that's why in the proposal, I also have a fairness API, we can call it whatever it is, right? Where we would have the same thing. Like, you would need to, it defines your fairness scope, okay? And it's the same idea. Like, you leave it to some other higher level, like, layer that defines what I want to track fairness on. Who are my tenants? I don't know. Like, as an inference gateway, I should not dictate what a tenant is. Just need to give you a way for you to define a tenant, and track fairness across.
But then we're pushing, like Rob mentioned earlier, we're either pushing identity to the HTTP route, which I don't think it ever did. No. Like, I don't think HTTP route was meant to be an identity.
It's a front end pod.
Yeah, right. So, or we're saying the headers are picked by the client, which then they kind of get to pick their own policy. Which I think you kind of do indirectly by the route match.
So no, I don't think that's you again. Like, you want to define, like, EPP needs to identify a flow, okay, to apply fairness. We have an abstract definition of that. There is some other layer that is going to basically map that to either an application or to a user. What is the problem? What is the what is the problem with this approach? Isn't that the most generic approach to address? Isn't that like a proper separation of concern between what EPP is supposed to do, which is applying fairness, and who defines the scope of fairness, which is some other layer depending on the application.
Right, but EPP needs to be able to implement it. And so if it's implementing it, how is it selecting that identity?
But that's what like the header is like, you're an abstract header, abstract API that says there is the concept of a fairness, okay? You are going to track fairness using this header. Same thing when we said about SLO and criticality. It's abstract concept.
I think it's
right, but that's bank accounts can be an abstract concept. If I reached into your account and spent your budget, you wouldn't like it, is what I'm saying. So if you just attach an arbitrary header, I can spend someone else's bank account money. Like, and GPUs are expensive. So if I just attach a header, I can do that. And if we force the HTTP route to do that, what I'm saying is we're giving a transitive property of the HTTP route is now an identity mechanism, which, Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if it's supposed to be.
No, like, again, like, we're starting from the APP. The APP is not supposed to basically define entities. I guess we agreed on that. It's not in the position to do that. It's only in the position of execution. Okay, and I want to define it. I want to define what it should execute on. That's step one. Now, how we do that, what we're saying here is, one approach is to use HTTP route if you're comfortable with that, right? Like, if your system is like can use that. For example, it's an internal system where you can apply those things in HTTP route. If not, if it's an external one, then you have to set up an AI gateway, so to speak. Okay, something like in Google Apigee, or in IBM, they have this proxy that does auth and translates this to a specific flow. There's another system that needs to define and apply security and policies. We're not going to be able to do that, like as EPP, and it should not.
Enian, your hands up. A lot of time. I think you were.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, a lot of really good discussion, and I agree. Yeah, I would say in generally policy is always far more difficult, at least from my experience, to implement because of all the kind of conflict resolution of where policies can be attached throughout the hierarchy and so forth. And in the chat window, I threw out a couple of links as well. And again, this is just for thought experiment, and that is defining, you know, a filter, right? And so as a request comes in, we use, right, a filter is part of that whole rules of an HTTP route or other route types, right? Where we match, let's say, if it's on a header that defines a user, or like with BBR, we take the model name and put it in the header, and then before forwarding it to the backend, such as an inference pool, you know, we define a filter, and a, you know, basically an implementation specific filter to do something with that request before forwarding off. So just kind of throw that out there as well to think about.
Rob?
Yeah, I maybe to go a bit further with Danian's example, I think we're roughly heading in the same direction here. Just today, actually, or yesterday, sometime soon, recently, Nick on Gateway API side made some significant progress on our attempt to standardize auth in Gateway API, which is exciting and feels very relevant to this discussion. You know, as that comes through, you can imagine a situation where gateways have a standard way to, you know, understand through this plugin, through these results, like who is making a request or some kind of identity associated with that. You could imagine also at the gateway layer some kind of additional API surface, likely not directly inside Gateway API, but not within the gateway resource, within Gateway API, not within the gateway resource. But you can imagine some kind of mapping API that basically says this identity or this group of identities should be given this criticality or this, you know, this. And by the time it gets to EPP, EPP just knows this request gets this criticality. And I don't care how it got there. I just know this is what it has. So again, just getting back to layering, and I think we do need some API surface somewhere to cover the mapping between those, but that doesn't need to block the, you know, contract between gateway and EPP. Like you can have that contract, and then you can have the contract in front of it, basically, of how you map something resembling an identity or model combination. I'm not sure what the right inputs are to these kind of criticality parameters.
Yeah, I agree. I think it comes back to the point that was already mentioned earlier, that authorization authentication should come from a layer above. Shmuel, I see your hands up also.
Yeah, I was just gonna chime in. I guess the same thing Daniel said. You know, you could add in the case of Istio, and I presume in the case of K-Gateway, it's not far away. You could add a HTTP filter up front that validated the user, the author authenticated them, and if he requested, you know, criticality that he wasn't allowed to, reject the call. And by the time it and even this thing could add some other token, you know, some header that the EPP understands, right? That the user doesn't even necessarily know it exists. In fact, your filter can even check that the user did not put one in there for step one value. All these things can be done quite easily. And if you're only dealing with headers, you don't even have to pass the body around, which will give you a lot better performance. Right? And if you're really crazed about performance, you could do a real envoy, or I imagine K-Gateway has the same kind of things. You can do a real envoy extension, in C, and rebuild envoy and have a lot of fun. And that'll work too. I would advise it, but it's a different story. At least on a Mac, it doesn't work. At least on a Mac, I've not succeeded yet. Try once. Anyways.
Yeah. So I think we're almost aligned on the so on the high level details, we are pretty aligned, and the small details, so there are a couple of ways to implement the same thing, right? Whether it's filter of HTTP route or other things that were mentioned here, but basically we're all aligned on the fact that authorization, authentication, SLO, these things should be set before EPP. So Abdullah, I did want to ask one additional question about this document. So last time I've read it, it had only one option. So now that it has additional options, so do you have any preferred option? So
I mean, this needs to be driven by the a consensus in the community. I have my preference to the second option, of course. I see it much more. The first one is going to quickly become a problem for any deployment at scale, like for mass deployments. And so, yeah, definitely the second option is my preferred option. But again, this needs to be approved, get through the
yeah, sure, of course, yeah. I'm asking. I intend to read it again. Just like to get what should I focus on, and what do you think, as the author and the one who receives most of the comments and responds on? So you probably know and understand what should be preferred out of the existing options. Cool, great. So we're exactly on time. 1 minute late, but almost exactly on time. So if there are no additional topics, thank you everyone, and see you in 2 weeks.
Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.